Beach FM, locals talking to locals.
Waikanae Ward Councillor for the Waikanae Community Board. It's Michael Scott's turn to have a chat today. Good morning, Michael.
Good morning, Nigel.
Now, you've got a busy old day ahead of you today, and you've got this Operation and Finance meeting at 10 o'clock, which, will you be raising the point of rates once again? I see there's quite a bit of disconcerting information being received by ratepayers, getting a letter from the Mayor telling them what it's going to cost them, but it's going to cost a lot of ratepayers a lot more than what they thought, up to 12% down at the Waikanae Beach area.
So last night I was involved with the online communication with people coming in onto Facebook and responding. I think there are three factors that are making up rates. Firstly, there's the council increase, which is currently averaging 4.7%. We've got a huge rate increase for some areas because of valuation changes, and of course we've got a large impost coming in from the Greater Wellington Regional Council asking us to pay what is a vast amount more than we've paid in the past. There are certainly people in Waikanae Beach who are paying a great deal higher than the average, and that's partly because of the QV valuations, which went up by at the beach 42%. In the garden area in Waikanae, for example, they went up considerably less because there was a hit there 3 years ago. So there are certainly some people who are paying quite a lot more, and we've heard a lot from them. There are also some people whose rates are going up just a few dollars a week. We're caught in a cleft stick here, Nigel. This is a place which is very desirable to live. Property prices are high, and we have an insatiable demand on council to produce things.
Yes, I'm just concerned about those who might be on fixed incomes who are going to be hit with this big rate rise. I mean, they could say, well, you could say, well, sell your house and move somewhere else, but they can't do that because it's going to cost them just as much to go and buy another house somewhere else.
It will, and one of the questions that came in last night is, for example, there's a big rates rise, but when am I able to apply for a rebate? Well, in the same year that the rates rise comes in. We are always undersubscribed in the people who apply for rates rebate. It's not a difficult process. Indeed, council actually has a staff member whose job it is to help people get the right information and fill in the forms and get them in on time. So one of the things I do encourage people to do is get their rates rebate application in, especially if they're facing hardship, especially if they're on a fixed income. It's the same for our water considerations. If you've got high water costs because of a large family or medical needs from someone in the home, you can apply for our rebate system. Virtually no one applied in the last 12 months.
Is that right? Now, increased property valuations, they say, across the district are a windfall for council, creating significant additional revenue, despite occasional argument to the contrary. Is that correct or not? Does the council get a big windfall?
Absolutely incorrect. We need about, in rough terms, 79 million. It's 79.6 million or something, but let's say 79 million to do all the things we want to do, to run the organisation, to pay the debts, to provide all the services that we currently provide. So all we do is we take that figure and we divide it across the rating base. One of the things this council's done is start a rates review. So already we're trying to move from the 51% of rates which just come from fixed charges, which are quite iniquitous, to try and move those. We're trying to change the land value and capital value balance to make each about 33%, and we're also looking to try and move some of the costs off the back of the domestic ratepayer and see whether certainly commercial can cover more of that. So this current council is very clear that the current system is a pretty blunt tool in order to get money. But absolutely, this is not a money grab. We need a certain amount of money to run the place, and no more is rated for.
And on top of this, of course, you got your water rates, which are separate, aren't they, from the rates? And we've got people having to pay for their rubbish. So they're in for a very hefty whack out of their fixed income this year.
So the 4.7%, which we've gone out to consultation on, includes the water component.
Oh, does it?
Even though it's charged separately. The idea for water is to try and keep it so that it simply pays the costs and no more. Now, when we brought water meters in, there was an estimated usage. It fell by 26%, partly because of leak detection, which took about 24%, and about 2% of people changing their attitudes in the way they use water. So what Council decided to do was spread that cost over a number of years. Within the next year or two, we start to move that account back into credit. We're never going to run it at a surplus. We just want it to cover the costs. And when you think that a cube of water is going to cost about $1.20, that's incredibly cheap. You see people prepared to pay $5 for 400 mils of water, which is full of sugar and colouring.
So that 4.7 includes the water rates.
That's supposed to take into account the water. We just don't know, you see, what people's consumption's going to be. So we can't go out there and say your water rate will be X or Y. So what we've done is we've tried to calculate that in terms of that average rate increase. So that's why the letter that went out to people didn't say you at your particular house will pay X for water, because we just don't know what you're going to use.
So we've got to put 4.7 and we've still got to pay for the water, you might say, whatever we use.
Yes, but it'll be within that arrangement. And when you look at the 4.7, you suddenly realise that it takes about 3.8% to stand still. So that includes a bit for inflation, it includes a bit for added things that people want to make the system still work. It covers those things that we simply need to replace because they've worn out. So if you take about 3.8% of the rate increase simply to stand still, to make the sewage go away, to cut the grass, to run the libraries and the pools and all of the things that people want, the balance to increase to answer all of the extra things that our community want is not huge. The problem is that QV did their 3-yearly increase. Across the district, some places actually will go down or at least stand still. But for many, for example, at Waikanae Beach, extremely desirable to live, assisted by the expressway and the work that's been done down there on the beach outcomes, means that costs are going to rise.
So, I mean, they could... Oh, no, it's too late now to put in a submission saying that their ratings are too high. The QV ratings I'm talking about, that's passed, over and done with. It's settled, signed and sealed, is it?
It is, but that's why it's really important for us to hear from people about how the rates are impacting on them in terms of the long-term plan, because communities will be putting in bids for all sorts of things. Already this council has trimmed our spending enormously so that we are spending less, so that we're borrowing less. You know, the aim for the end of this financial year will be to have us around 155 million net borrowing point. When I began chairing operations and finance, we were looking at bursting through our self-imposed ceiling of 204 million. So already this council's restrained that desire. That isn't quite yet coming through in our rates, but if you look across the LTP, you can see that as we close the depreciation gap, as we simply spend less on capital projects but actually deliver what we say we'll deliver, those rates increases start to go down.
With the increased number of people coming to live here and building at the moment, does that help the council out immensely, or does that create more problems?
No, it actually helps us out enormously well. Currently, we're actually quite good in terms of infrastructure. If you look at the fact that most of the development's going to be north of the Waikanae River, there's a fair bit of infrastructure already in place. The development costs, the reserve contributions that we get from section and land developers are currently reflecting very positively in terms of council's accounts. Put in layman's terms, we're getting in far more money than we thought we were getting, and what we're going to do with that is we're going to retire debt. We're going to close that depreciation gap, because since 2008, various councils have not always been steadfast in terms of closing that gap, which means that those figures have ballooned. At the end of 2017, $38 million worth of borrowings was simply to fund depreciation, and that's a gap we're trying to close.
All right, so if anybody's, as the Mayor's letter said, anybody wants to put in a contribution, willingness to consider ratepayers' views, when does that close, Michael?
Not for several more weeks.
Right.
We don't start staff looking at the various submissions that have come in and collating them for several more weeks, and we don't actually start hearings until the end of May, early June. So there's plenty of time, but what I say to people is you need to have a look at what we've gone out to consultation on and make some comment. It was interesting last night, Nigel, to be online talking with people. While some people had a view that was never going to change, others were at least prepared to listen and understand that we're not taking any more money than we actually need to run the organisation, that this council has severely trimmed down the spending. That, of course, is also means that we simply have less consultants, we have less outside contractors, because we are only delivering those projects that we can actually deliver.
Michael, we thank you for your time this morning, and interested to hear from your meeting later on today, how it goes.
Nigel, it's always good to be on Beach FM.
Michael Scott, he's Chair of the Operations and Finance Committee, but also our Ward Councillor for Waikanae.
106.3 Beach FM.